you might think Drew, or to be more accurate, was given the short straw when they asked me to speak about the Constitution. But I don't see it that way, because constitutions really do matter. They set limits to political action, and more importantly, they give shape to how and where and in what way politics can impact upon all of our lives. Now, for those among us who are of a revolutionary bent, and I hope that would be most of us, then we would do well to reflect on the uncomfortable fact that Britain's last and most successful revolution was the revolution of 1688. A revolution which delivered political reform from above in order to prevent political revolution from below, and a revolution whose baleful influence is still to be found 300 years after all around us. For example, it was the glorious revolution's invention of the Crown and Parliament that to this day still defines the sovereign core of the country that all of us live in. The peoples of this island, just as in 1688, remain subjects under authority, rather than citizens who define for themselves what political authority should be in their own country. And that really causes a lot of problems for us. Now, obviously, over the last 300 years, there have been many changes, not least the advent of political democracy itself. But because of the unwritten and the infinitely flexible nature of the British Constitution, that has meant that for most of the time and on most occasions, those changes have been defined for us by an elite, a political elite, that runs through the British Constitution, consisting of politicians, of judges, of generals, of admirals, of press barons, of business supremos, of Oxbridge graduates and so on. As Jim pointed out in the Monetary Policy Committee, we take these things for granted, but they're only there not by accident, they're there by design, in the British Constitution designed for them to be there. And one of the best reasons for voting yes in 2014 is because it will enable Scotland to lead a kind of working class breakout from the constitutional prison that elite has trapped working class people in this island in for more than 300 years so far. Now, turning to the white paper itself, what does it say about the kind of new constitutional future that we could have here in Scotland? Well, first of all, it promises an open and an inclusive and a very broadly based constitutional convention that will debate and then draw up the plans for a new written constitution for Scotland. But it doesn't spell out in any kind of detail how that constitutional convention will be put together, other than leaving it to the first independent Scottish Parliament to come forward with proposals for such a constitutional convention. And that causes me problems, because I was a member of the last Scottish Constitutional Convention that set up to deliver the blueprint for the devolved Scottish Parliament. And that Constitutional Convention claimed at the time that it was open and inclusive and broadly based, but in fact it was none of those things. In reality, it was self-appointed, it was elitist, and it was ultimately unrepresentative, because it consisted of politicians from some but not all of the political parties, and it consisted of some but not all civil society actors. And if that is what's planned by the Scottish Government, to have that kind of constitutional convention to draw up plans for a new written constitution, then we're all deeply, deeply in trouble if we dare to allow that kind of thing to happen. So we need to be thinking now about the kind of written constitution that we would want to see, the kind of constitutional convention which we would want to see. Now, it's suggested, should the convention be directly elected? Is that what we want? That a directly constitutional convention should be drawn up, separate from the political parties that sit in the Scottish Parliament, elected by the Scottish people, so that the Scottish people are in charge of it, and it decides the kind of constitution which is then put forward? Or should we do that some people are asking at the moment, that the way to involve the people of Scotland in such a constitutional convention is to set up these kind of citizen assemblies, very limited numbers of citizens who are chosen representatively, up to 500, to look at one aspect of the constitution. Some people call them, I think, mini mini publics or something. And these mini publics look at different aspects of the constitutions, make recommendations, and that goes to some other form of constitutional convention, maybe involving politicians and the voluntary sector and so on, to decide on. Is that the way to go forward? I'm not sure myself. I think we have to be debating these issues. We have to be clear in our own heads what we think these issues should be before we go much further forward. And if you turn to the actual the work of the Constitutional Convention, when it's set up, I mean, is it enough, for example, as the White Paper says, to have a constitutional ban on nuclear weapons being based on Scottish soil? Or should the constitutional ban be on Scotland being part of an alliance which has shelters under nuclear weapons and therefore implies that Scotland support those nuclear weapons to be threatened against other countries? I think the latter, obviously. Also, if the European Convention on Human Rights can be embedded into the new written constitution, why not the International Labour Organisation's Declaration of Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work as well? Why can't that be embedded into the new Scottish Constitution? There's nothing about that in the White Paper. And if it's possible to constitutionally guarantee the right to education, why can't we constitutionally guarantee the right to strike? Why can't we constitutionally guarantee the right to collective bargaining, or the right to a living wage, or the right to housing? Why can't they be written into a constitutional convention? There's no hint in the document Scotland's Future that that's what they intend to do. Also, why is there nothing in the White Paper about the use, or should I say the abuse, of political patronage, which goes on under the Scottish Parliament just as it went on under the Westminster Parliament before it? Why isn't that in there? And why can't we have some other way of appointing people to the various institutions that run the country, maybe with some democratic means rather than leave it to the party in power to do that? Why is there nothing in that document about popular or participatory budgeting that was pioneered in Brazil and was recently recommended by the Jimmy Reid Foundation as a way forward for the new Scottish Constitution? Nothing in there radical at all about it. And you see, constitutions are usually, in our history anyway, defined for us by powerful political elites who drew up those constitutions to suit their own interests and to entrench their own power. And here we are, if Scotland votes yes next year, with the possibility that for the first time a constitution could be drawn together by the people, the ordinary people of this country, that they could bring their eyes, their ideas, their thoughts, their aspirations into the framing of that constitution. And I don't see why that shouldn't be the case. Why we shouldn't be actively campaigning now on the left for that kind of constitution. Because nobody else is giving any much thought to that kind of detailed thing, and we've got to give thought to it now. I don't have the answers, I'm just raising the questions. And there's 100 other possibilities that could be in that constitution that I probably haven't thought about, that you could think about. And I think we need a very quick debate about that, so that when we get, if we get to the 2016 election of the first independent Scottish Parliament, that we have a body of proposals ready to put forward. Because remember, somebody once said that democracy begins and ends with a claim to sovereignty. Who is sovereign inside the democracy? We have lived in a so-called democracy for more than 100 years where the people aren't sovereign. We could live from now on in a democracy where the people really are sovereign. And that would be a prize worth winning and a prize worth fighting for. Thanks very much.